You know what's insane? I thought I made a mistake when I first calculated this. The T-800 CPU alone would cost more than SpaceX. Yeah, the SpaceX. Not just one rocket, the whole company. And get this, that's the cheap part. I spent a week breaking down every Terminator ever built, calculating exactly what these killing machines would cost today. The numbers are so ridiculous, I had to triple-check my math. In this breakdown, we're analyzing every model from the T-800 to Rev 9. And trust me, by the end, you'll understand why Skynet needed the entire planet's resources just to fund these things. Let's dive into Arnold's iconic T-800. Everyone knows this face, the cold stare, the leather jacket, the iconic "I'll be back." But what if I told you that building this killer machine would cost more than every Bugatti ever made combined? Let's start with what makes the T-800 think, that neural net processor and storage system. We're talking about a quantum computer that can learn and adapt, packed with enough storage to hold the behavioral patterns of an entire city. Price tag? $2.6 billion. Yeah, that's billion with a B. Just the brain of this thing costs more than sending 4 rockets to Mars. Then there's the manufacturing equipment and processing tools. You can't just build this in your garage. The specialized facilities and tools needed to create a T-800? Another $520 million. That's like buying a skyscraper just to make one robot. The hydraulics and skeleton might seem basic compared to the brain, but don't be fooled. That hyperalloy combat chassis, along with all the servos and hydraulic systems, $127.8 million. You could buy a small airline fleet for that price. And finally, the power source and living tissue covering, the parts that make it look human. Surprisingly, this is the cheapest component at just $1.3 million, though I use the word cheap very loosely here. Total cost for one T-800 in 2025? $3.25 billion. That's right. You could run a small country for a year with that money. And remember, this is the basic model. Wait until you see what the upgrades cost. Remember how I said the T-800 was expensive? Well, Skynet looked at that $3.25 billion price tag and thought, let's make it even pricier. Meet the T-850. Same look, way bigger budget. The first major upgrade? That brain. The enhanced neural net processor and storage systems now cost $3 billion. Why the price bump? Because Skynet basically doubled the learning capabilities and added military-grade tactical programming. It's like sending your killer robot to Harvard, but more expensive. But here's where things get really interesting, the power system. Instead of one hydrogen fuel cell, the T-850 runs on 2. When one gets damaged, it switches to backup. Sounds cool until you see the price tag. $300 million for the power system and synthetic skin. The endoskeleton got a serious upgrade too. Stronger alloys, better shock absorption, improved combat chassis. $500 million worth of improvements. You could build a luxury hotel for that price, but Skynet preferred a better skeleton for its killing machine. Manufacturing this upgraded nightmare? The specialized equipment and processing costs jumped to $700 million. Turns out, building a more advanced death robot requires more advanced tools. Who knew? Total cost for the T-850? A whopping $4.5 billion. That's enough money to run NASA's entire operations for a month. But Skynet was just getting started with its spending spree. Wait until you see how much the shape-shifting models cost. The TX is like an entire military arsenal packed into a single robot. Skynet basically said, what if we combined everything deadly about our previous models and then added transforming weapons? Spoiler alert, it wasn't cheap. Let's start with that brain. The TX takes the T-850's $3 billion neural network and adds another $500 million worth of control systems just to manage its shape-shifting and weapons. That's right, $500 million just to coordinate all its fancy new tricks. Speaking of tricks, let's talk about that chassis. They kept the T-850's reinforced endoskeleton and power system, but then wrapped it in a mimetic polyalloy coating, which makes $1.2 billion in total. Think of it as a deadly chrome paint job that costs more than a small space program. But here's where things get really expensive. Those nano-weapons. The ability to transform arms into plasma cannons and flamethrowers? $1.2 billion. Each weapon system is basically a tiny factory of microscopic robots, constantly rebuilding themselves into whatever the TX needs. And manufacturing this technological nightmare? The specialized equipment needed to build and test these systems runs another $1.1 billion. Turns out, building nanoscale weapon factories inside a robot isn't cheap. The TX hits a staggering $7 billion. That's like buying every PlayStation 5 ever made, twice. But believe it or not, Skynet found a way to spend even more money on their next model. The T-1000, Skynet's liquid metal masterpiece that made us all scared of puddles. No endoskeleton, no traditional weapons. Just pure programmable matter that can transform into anything it touches. Let's start with that mind-bending AI system. The T1000 needs more computing power than all of Google's quantum computers combined just to maintain its shape. Price tag? $4.5 billion. That's as much as OpenAI spent on developing GPT-4 times 45, just to make liquid metal know what it wants to be. But that's nothing compared to the mimetic polyalloy itself. We're talking about a material that can instantly transform at the molecular level, repair itself, and perfectly mimic any texture it touches. Cost? $4 billion. You could build 50 F-35 fighter jets for that price, but Skynet preferred one shape-shifting assassin. And manufacturing this liquid nightmare? The specialized facilities needed to produce and program this material make TSMC's chip factories look like kids' toys. Another $1.5 billion just for the equipment and processing, because apparently teaching liquid metal to kill isn't cheap. Total cost for the T1000? A mind-numbing $10 billion. That's enough to run NASA's entire operations for 2 months. No wonder Skynet needed to take over the world. These things aren't exactly budget-friendly. Finally, the Rev 9. Skynet's accountants probably had a heart attack with this one. Imagine taking everything expensive about the T1000, then basically building 2 Terminators in one. Yeah, it's that crazy. Let's start with those dual AI systems. One brain was expensive enough, but the Rev 9 needs 2 fully independent neural networks that can split and sync at will. Cost? $6 billion. That's more than Tesla spends on their self-driving AI development in 3 years. Then there's that hybrid structure, pure evil engineering at its finest. You've got T1000-style liquid metal and a hardcore endoskeleton. Best of both worlds? More like cost of both worlds. $5 billion for this split-personality hardware. And manufacturing? Making one killer robot is hard enough. Making one that can split into 2? The specialized facilities and processing for this nightmare run $2 billion. Intel builds entire chip factories for that kind of money. Total price tag for the Rev 9? An astronomical $13 billion. That's more than NASA's entire annual Mars exploration budget. Think about that. We could be exploring the Red Planet, but instead we got a robot that really wants to terminate John Connor. So let's add up every Terminator model. The total will shock you. You know how tech companies love to show off their quarterly earnings? Well, let's look at Skynet's balance sheet. When you add up the basic T800 at $3.25 billion, its upgraded brother T850 at $4.5 billion, the shape-shifting TX running $7 billion, our liquid metal friend T1000 costing $10 billion, and the split personality Rev 9 at a whopping $13 billion. Skynet spent more money than NASA's entire annual budget. We're talking $37.75 billion just to perfect their killer robot collection. But here's what's truly terrifying. These were just the prototypes. Skynet mass-produced these things. Thousands of T800s, hundreds of T1000s. The total cost would be more than the GDP of most countries combined. Now you understand why Skynet needed to take over all of humanity's resources. Building an army of killer robots isn't cheap. And with AI advancing faster than ever, maybe we should keep an eye on Boston Dynamics' bank account. As for the price of saving humanity, well, in the words of a famous T800, hasta la vista, baby.
Hasta la vista, baby.